milk and added a lot of spices to it. So this is still celebrated in India in modern times during a festival called Holi, which is in honor of Lord Shiva, who is the patron saint of cannabis in India. And during Holi, all the people get these bright pigments and they paint themselves elaborately, and they drink bang, and they have these kind of crazy psychedelic festivals. So it's very interesting. And when you consider the history of cannabis cuisine, you can see how it spread throughout the ancient world. So as I said before, the first evidence of cannabis, as a food or medicine was found in Mongolia, China, and then it spread throughout the Middle East to India and all over Asia. So we find it mentioned in the classic text of Arabian literature, 1001 Nights. They talk about a fisherman who they say he is a fisherman by trade and a hashish eater by occupation. And they tell the story of this man who ate hashish 3 times a day, once in the morning on an empty stomach, once for lunch, and once for dinner. And in the story, they say that he was never lacking in extravagant gaiety. So we can wonder what he must have been doing while he was out there fishing high on hash all day. Also in the 19th century, we have the French literary greats had a club called the Club of Hash, basically where people like Dumas, Gautier, Baudelaire would all gather and they would mix hash into their coffee, and they would sit up all night and they'd have these intense, philosophical discussions, and we see a lot of great literature coming out of this movement. The person who reintroduced cannabis cookery to modern American society was Alice B. Toklas. Has anyone here heard of Alice B. Toklas brownies? You ever heard of this? Yeah, a few people? So Alice B. Toklas was the partner of Gertrude Stein, who was a literary and artistic genius. And Alice had this cookbook, and she solicited recipes from her friends. And she had kind of a wise-ass friend who was a painter. And he gives her this recipe for kind of the precursor to the cannabis brownie, but it's really sort of like a glue ball. And it includes cannabis. And Alice, she was pretty naive. She didn't understand exactly what it was. But she included this recipe in her cookbook. And it took the 1950s America by storm. It was the greatest publicity stunt anyone ever did. So her recipe was really just a bunch of spices that you ground up in a mortar and pestle, and then you mix it in with dates and dried fruit, and then you dissolve sugar in a pat of cannabis butter. You roll that all up, mix it all up, and that was one of the first recipes that people in America had ever heard of for how to eat cannabis. So, I don't know if you guys can see this, but in 1978, this was the first story that High Times published about edible pot, and it was entitled simply, Eat It. And it was all about a guy who traveled the world on different sailing ships, and he was introduced to cannabis cuisine in Greece, where they made a candy called majoum, which was a hash candy, basically made by mix up your crumbled hash, sugar, arrowroot powder, and sweet butter. And then you add a little honey and the chopped pistachios, mix that together, you mold it into a little candy. So this is another interesting historical recipe that we find from 1978. So in the 60s and 70s, we see a lot of hippies who really get into the Back to the Land movement. And this is also the period of time when marijuana becomes part of the counterculture, and it's a renaissance of marijuana and marijuana cuisine. So we see a lot of, the 60s and 70s hippies. They move up to, places like Humboldt County, Mendocino. They start growing their own vegetables. They rebel against what was happening in American cuisine at the time, which was a lot of prepackaged food, processed ingredients, and they said, we're going to make this food and grow it ourselves. So that became a seed of what we now know as the modern local and organic food movement, which is very interesting to think about. And a lot of these hippies who lived up on the land also were growing marijuana for their own fun and for, to make ends meet. So you see the cannabis brownie become really popular around this time. And that brings us up to the modern era of medical marijuana. And in 1996, when Proposition 215 passed in California, and now we see a whole plethora of cannabis edibles and a whole new industry that's grown up around ways to eat pot. So one thing that you can consider when you're buying edibles at a dispensary is to look for the label information. Make sure the label information is clear and concise, and that you understand how much cannabis, how much THC is contained in your edible, and how much of it you're supposed to eat. Because some people, they can be a little vague in their recommendations on the packaging. And you'll see edibles that have up to 400 milligrams of THC, and yet the serving size says 1. Well, that's a pretty high dose. So I'd recommend for a lot of people, if you're buying edibles from the dispensary, just eat a little bit and wait and see how it's going to affect you. So, kind of went over that. Yeah. I'd like to say a little bit about hemp. Does anyone here eat hemp and get hemp in their diet? Let's see a show of hands. A few people, but not too many for a marijuana crowd. Hemp is the cannabis cousin, basically. So hemp contains no THC, but it has a lot of great omega-3s, omega-6s, great things to get into your diet, a lot of protein. So I'd like to encourage everyone that if you don't already eat hemp and get it into your diet, do that to support those people who are making these products. I'm going to show this picture. Go back. Oh. So here we are. This is the collective that I work with in Santa Cruz, California, known as WHAM, the Women and Men's Alliance for Medical Marijuana. And this is the garden that we work in every summer. And so I just wanted to show that to you guys. Beautiful picture. And we'll talk a little bit about the how-to of cooking cannabis. So the WHAM garden is a very interesting place because they do something that I've never seen any other cannabis collective do, which is they use every single part of the plant. So they're harvesting the leaves to use for edibles, but what they do is they pulverize the leaves after they're dry in a blender, and they take a silk screen that's been mounted on a frame, and underneath the silk screen on the frame, you have a piece of glass or a piece of mirror. So then they take the blended up cannabis leaves, and they pour them on the screen, and you sit there, with gloves, and you rub it through the screen until the finely textured marijuana flower falls beneath, and then you can just lift off the screen and you scrape it off the mirror. So this is a recipe I share in the cookbook because I found it very interesting because they don't advise people to strain the cannabis away from the butter. They just texture it so finely that when you put the flour in a pan with the butter, it just dissolves. And so you can use this flour as a substitute for half of the flour that would be called for in a recipe. So it's a very interesting program. As you all might know, you can use many different parts of the cannabis as different starting ingredients. So part of the thing about cannabis cooking is that there's so many variables and there's so much variation in your beginning product that it's important to know what you're working with. Are you working with cannabis that's 15% THC, 25% THC? Are you using the trimmed sugar leaves? Are you using the flowers? Some people will cook with, sifted trichromes or unpressed hash, which is the best tasting ingredient in my opinion, but also the most expensive. So a lot of people, if you're looking for an affordable ingredient, it's usually the sugar leaves, the trimmed leaves. So as you all know, there's several different methods for basic infusions, and we cover all of these in the book. So when you're trying to get cannabis into your food, you're going to simmer it in butter or oil or any kind of fat, and the THC is going to bind to the lipids. So that's the reaction that you're looking for if you want a psychoactive cannabis edible. It's been a long night, people. How does cannabis work? Why does eating cannabis affect you differently than smoking cannabis? Does anybody here know why that is?
Liver metabolite.
Liver metabolite, exactly. So when you eat cannabis, it's going through your entire digestive system, and then it's going to get to your liver. And what happens in your liver is that the THC is changed into another substance called 11-hydroxy-THC. And this substance that your own body creates in your liver is much more psychoactive than THC. So that's why when you eat cannabis, it can be very intense, and it can last for a long time, and it can be downright psychedelic if you eat too much of it. And that's because of how your body metabolizes it in your liver. So, in the book we cover many safety tips, and I'm sure many of you have learned these through trial and error, through experiences of either yourselves or your friends, that when you are eating cannabis food or when you're cooking it, I always tell people, go low and go slow. And so when you're eating it, that means start with a low dose and wait. Wait 2 or 3 hours before you eat any more cannabis food, because then you're going to know that it's worked through your system and you're going to have an idea of how it's going to affect you. And I can't tell you how many people that I've met who say, I overdid it. And that's the biggest mistake that everybody makes, is you're like, oh, I'm going to eat this edible, it tastes so good, all right. Let's, 45 minutes later, you're like, oh, it's not doing anything. Let's eat another one. And then you can get yourself into some trouble. So I always tell people, go low, go slow. And when you're cooking cannabis, that applies because you're going to cook it on a low temperature and you're going to cook it for a long time. And that's important to get the correct kind of infusion that you want. So, let's skip the tinctures. Everybody here knows how to make a tincture, right? No? We cover very basic tinctures in the book, and you can infuse cannabis into alcohol or into glycerin. And these tinctures form the base for a lot of other interesting recipes. Like when you see in dispensaries, they have the cannabis-infused soft drinks. Those are made with glycerin base, usually. So in the book, we have our basic infusions, and we also have a chapter on irie appetizers. So I'll just tell you guys about a few of those right now. So, the sativa shrimp spring rolls are a really awesome recipe in the book that was created for High Times by a friend, Chef Bliss. And the active ingredient in this recipe is THC oil. We get into some really interesting things in the book. We talk about the cutting edge of cannabis cuisine, which is basically based on the science of terpenes right now. There's terpenes and there's flavonoids in your cannabis. And these are chemicals that are found in all different plants. So if you're really trying to get some really cutting-edge cannabis cuisine, you want to try and pair the strains that you're using to the flavors in the food that you're going to cook. And you can do this by looking and seeing what terpenes are in the food. And there's terpenes like alpha-pinene, which is also found in pine needles and rosemary. So you can use these flavors to create some really interesting dishes. And in the book we do this with our Tom Yum Ganja, which is a coconut milk-based soup. And so you use a strain like haze or something that's like rich in like myrcene, which is a terpene that really works with Asian flavors. So we also have a whole chapter of munchy meals, which I think a lot of people would really enjoy. And in the book, we included a lot of different recipes so that you can fit cannabis into your everyday lifestyle and your everyday diet. So there's things like the red, green, and gold rasa pasta, which is a counterculture classic, a recipe from our friend Chef Ra. And he traveled the Grateful Dead tour for many years. And he was famous for this pasta, which he sold all across the country at different shakedown streets. So we try to get like a lot of different counterculture heroes in the book. So you're going to read stories that, the recipes are interesting, but there's also history behind it. We also have some really fun recipes from different chefs who live in New York, where High Times is based out of New York City. And this is, we have one from our friend Eddie Huang, who's a New York City chef and restaurateur, and he did our Cheeto fried chicken, which is a really excellent recipe. And it kind of plays off the stereotypes of stoner food. Because most people say, what is stoner food? Oh, it's just junk food. All those people are just junk food junkies. They're pigging out on Doritos and, low quality snack foods. So Eddie kind of had fun with that. He said, let's take these Cheetos, pound them up, and we're going to use them to put a crust on our chicken. So it's kind of some fun, interesting, creative cuisine that you're going to find in the book. We also have some really decadent dishes, like our pot and pancetta stuffed beef tenderloin. And the woman who contributed that recipe is a friend. Her name's Hempy Chef Raquel. She gets you with the double whammy in that recipe. She's got the infused oil and the infused butter. So I'd recommend that for a very special occasion. We have a chapter in the book about holidays, because cannabis food isn't for everybody, and it's not for all the time, for some people. So when it's time for a special occasion, you know, Halloween, 4th of July, these are great holidays to have a fun party and to make some infused foods. So we have a whole chapter that's devoted to special recipes for the holidays that I think everyone will enjoy. We also include some really interesting recipes from High Times employees. We used to have a tradition at the office called Space Cake Friday, where every Friday a different member of the High Times crew would take a turn making some kind of interesting dish, and then we'd all go out and share it. And gradually this tradition kind of died out because a few people overindulged a couple times. But there's a great recipe in the cookbook from our editor, Bobby Black, and he includes his excellent Bobby Blackout cake, which is infused several different ways, and he sprinkles hash on top for an extra touch. So, like I said before, we include a lot of interesting recipes from our counterculture heroes. And these are people like Jack Herer, people like Brownie Mary, and we include her classic recipe for brownies. And for people who don't know, Brownie Mary was a very inspiring and wonderful activist. And at her height, she baked up to 1,500 brownies a week, and she gave them to AIDS patients. And so she was arrested for this several times, and each time that she was arrested, she would go into court, you know, this is a little old lady, and she would wear these pro-legalization t-shirts and pot leaf buttons, and she just would dare the prosecutor in San Francisco to find a jury that would convict a little old lady for making brownies for AIDS patients. So we talk about a lot of these people in the book. Another fun thing we include in the book are recipes for stoner celebrity favorites. And I know Dave talked about this a little bit earlier, but so for Snoop Dogg, we created the Little Snoop Hot Doggy Dogs. And this is a recipe where you take a hot dog, you cut it, stuff it with cheese, wrap it in bacon, and you deep fry it. And then you serve it on a bun that's been toasted and brushed with cannabis butter. So not all the recipes are healthy. There's definitely some really decadent ones. And we advise people to cut that one into 3 pieces and share it with their friends. We also have a great recipe for Willie Nelson, as well as one for Cheech and Chong. The final chapter in the book is about cannabis cocktails. And we include a couple recipes that have alcohol in them for people who want to combine cannabis and alcohol in some really interesting drinks, such as the Lawnmower, which was named for some friends I have in Mendocino, these renegade vegan growers. They named it the Lawnmower because you're cutting grass with vodka. So basically you're taking cannabis vegetable juice and you're mixing it with a cannabis-infused vodka for a drink that's really awesome in the mornings. One of the awesomest recipes we have in the book for cocktails is the Bong Hitters Moda Mojito. And this was the signature drink of the High Times Bong Hitters softball team, which are a really excellent team in the Publishing League in New York. And so this recipe was created for them by a friend we have in Central Park, who he travels around, he's got a battery-powered blender, and so he mixes up these mojitos after the game. So it's really, really interesting. The final thing I'd like to talk about is something that's gotten really popular in California, and I want to know if it's spread to Colorado yet. Do you guys know about juicing raw cannabis leaves? Has anybody here done that? Tried it? A few people? How did it affect you? How did you find it?
I did do it myself as someone that took a lot of pharmaceuticals and a lot of disease, for example, the symptom of the natural extract. So they do this cannabis leaves and it's helped tremendously.
Okay.
And then also, later you take juice and dried leaves and feed it to rats and you take down the
Interesting.
The oil.
Interesting. The oil can be too intense for some people.
Makes tumors weigh 2 to 5 days in rats.
Wow, I have not heard of that. But so the raw cannabis juice, you can take the fresh leaves off your plant, you run it through a vegetable juicer with carrots or kale or whatever else you like, and it's not psychoactive, but you're going to get all the medicinal helpful compounds. So for people who are really ill, who need to absorb a lot of cannabinoids very quickly, you're going to reach a threshold with smoking or with eating edibles that you're just going to get so high that you can't absorb any more cannabinoids. But if you use this raw juice, you're going to saturate your body with cannabinoids, and it can really, really help people's health problems out. So we talk about this in the book, and I really, really encourage people to try it. It's a great thing to do. So I'll take your questions now. Okay. Okay, we're running a little bit long. So if anyone has any questions for me, or if you'd like to get a book, I'll be happy to sign them and talk to you. I'm going to go to the High Times booth in the main room. So I'd just like to say thank you to everybody, and I hope you're having a great weekend so far.
So Lise McDonough, the author of the official High Times Cannabis Cookbook, she'll be at the High Times booth in the main room signing books right now. And our next panel is going to get started very shortly. I'm going to turn it over to High Times Executive Editor Dan Skye.
Thank you very much. Once again, a warm hand for Lise McDonough over here. Unbelievable. Okay, so at 5 o'clock we have a very, very interesting seminar coming up. All the members are showing up right now. As you all know, over there in the medication room, dabs are dominant. And so people are wondering about DAP, they're wondering about concentrates, they're wondering how they're made. And so we hope to answer a few of your questions, solve a lot of the problems today. So that's going to be coming up in just about 10 minutes. We're just getting all our panelists together. They got it a little bit late, so in about 10 minutes we're going to start our final seminar of the day, okay? So keep on doing your good thing here.
How much are the cookbooks?
Can you maybe say they're $20 and then just say she's at the High Times book? Yeah, it might easier, man.
People are wondering how much the cookbook was. It's $20, and once again, it's available at the High Times booth. Elise is over there signing them, so check it out. It's getting great reviews. It's on a book signing tour, so check it out over at the High Times booth. And once again, we'll get started very, very shortly as our panelists are showing up now.
Okay. No problem. Is he gone already? No, I mean, he's here somewhere. I'll find him and I'll tell him that you guys need to resolve this and figure out. Okay, I'm find me, then that's what I'm going to do. Okay. Thanks. Yep. You guys just speak up.
Okay.